take home the Golden Gloves, you've got to put in the work, and you've got to be tough as nails. Ashley Kalis was driven to achieve. Today, Kalis is still fueled by that same hope, grit, and determination. A mother of 3 school-aged boys and successful business owner who ran testing and vaccination sites across the state. Kalis is the fighter Rhode Island needs right now because it's time for a change. Ashley Kalis for governor.
Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so that means I'm welcoming you to another episode of Chaz Calenda, attorney at law here on the Coalition Radio Network. I'm your host, Chaz Calenda, and I'm an attorney at the law firm of Inman and Torgy in Coventry. And as usual, I'll be hosting tonight's show. And as always, I'll be keeping the law above politics. As you know, we follow statewide political and legal issues here on the Chaz Calenda attorney at law. And tonight's going to be no different. And my guest tonight to help me discuss one of the ongoing legal issues and political issues that's been rearing its head again here in Rhode Island is Glenn Valentine, part of the Second Amendment Coalition, who will help me discuss pending gun control legislation that may be coming out of the Rhode Island General Assembly as early as tomorrow. Glenn, thank you for joining me on the show tonight.
Hey, thanks, Chaz. I appreciate you having me.
Not a problem. So, Glenn, obviously, we all know about the tragedy in Texas. We all know everything that's been going on over the last week or so with that situation, and obviously, it's a terrible situation. One of the things that's come out of that has been a renewed push by the gun control advocates here in Rhode Island, not only in the General Assembly, but the advocacy groups that are always there at the State House, the Moms Demand Action being one of them, to push for the yearly gun control bills that we've been seeing introduced into the General Assembly year in and year out, particularly the magazine ban, the large capacity magazine ban, the so-called assault weapons ban, raising the minimum age to 21 to purchase all firearms, things of those nature. And apparently some of these are going to be, some, if not all, are going to be considered tomorrow night. Is that what's going on?
Sure. So yes. So those bills are sort of on the table post this shooting in Texas. And so, to kind of back up a little bit. So it is a perennial push since the shooting in Newtown. We've seen this every single year. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party pushing this agenda. And it really has nothing to do with public safety. It's more of just pushing that party further and further to the left. They superimpose what's happening nationally with the shooting in Newtown, the shooting that happened in Texas, and really any of these shootings that take place. We have different laws in Rhode Island, so it's not comparing apples to apples. It's apples to squirrels. It's not, we don't have the same laws that they have in Texas. But naturally, after this happened, there has been a huge push since then. It's only been a week now, and bills that we didn't think were on the table seem to be headed for a vote if we can't stop these things. And so the vote isn't tomorrow. It likely would be next week. They have to still vote them out of committee. They've been heard, so there's no more hearings. I know folks are asking one of the hearings. There are no hearings. The process is it goes to a hearing. They're usually held for the study. And then those bills go back to committee and are voted out of committee and then out to the floor for in the House and the Senate for a vote. So they haven't been scheduled for the passage in committee yet, but we expect something at this point. We've got folks on both Democrats and Republicans that have been telling us that the momentum, the other side has momentum. It's just we're nervous about what exactly that will entail. So the big ones are, well, so to kind of rewind a little bit, in the past, folks haven't been super motivated because they've passed like what people consider to be low-hanging fruit. Now, I know you as an attorney would make the case that things like red flag legislation and the protective orders, the Protect Rhode Island Families Act, that's not low-hanging fruit. But to a lot of gun guys who don't understand the law, they may think that that's not a big deal. And so now that all of those things are gone, they're coming after the big ones, which we've talked about this many times, that these bills go far beyond what these descriptions of the bills say they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it may seem like something trivial to someone who's a law-abiding citizen, a law-abiding gun owner that, say, oh, well, we'll ban the magazines that can hold more than 30 rounds or more than 10 rounds in this case. But, literally, I'm not sure how the final bill would be written or the final legislation would be seen, but I don't know if there's going to be a grandfather clause, if there's going to be an overnight just ban on these things. You have a certain time period to just turn them in or sell them to a person who would legally be able to possess them. But that's a big concern. And, it has a lot of unintended consequences, just like the red flag bill, in my opinion, something I deal with on alert flag law, which is something I deal with on a daily basis over in the courts. But you're right. I wanted to hit on something you said there, Glenn, is that, we're talking about comparing what happened in Texas and the laws that they have in Texas and what we have in Rhode Island. I mean, there really is no comparison. Rhode Island has some of the most draconian laws when it comes to illegal use or possession of firearms that there are in the United States. And just, being an attorney dealing with those in the criminal sense, I mean, I can tell you people go to prison routinely for just illegal possession of a firearm, never mind using it. So it's, I mean, to say that we're in the same kind of danger that a place maybe like Texas would be for having a tragedy like this to happen simply because we don't have necessarily the laws that they like to stop it, I think is a complete misrepresentation.
Right. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. So Rhode Island has front loaded the law with lots of ways to stop people from getting guns that shouldn't have guns. So we have waiting periods. Not that waiting period was really meant to be, it wasn't meant really to be for the background check. It was a cooling off period, in case someone was to, potentially commit a crime of whatever. But regardless, we have a waiting period. We have lots of, we have thorough background checks, although there are some issues with that should probably be tightened up because we've had situations where people have gotten guns that shouldn't. But for the most part, they're sticking to the ones that are more attractive in terms of the bills that would be restrictive to magazine capacity, bills that would ban most semi-automatic firearms. Those are the ones that are politically popular. So to say you want to fix the background check and make it more functional, that's not on the table because it doesn't garner a lot of interest from the very sort of left-leaning folks. But banning assault weapons, I mean, or if that's what you're going to call them, if they're going to call them assault weapons, by pushing that bill in this state for the purposes of stopping a tragedy like we saw in Texas, well, just 10 days before the shooting in Texas, we saw a shooting in New York State, which involved all of the firearms that they want to outlaw and all the accessories they want to outlaw in Rhode Island. And those things have been outlawed for 25 years. And this New York's had several iterations of an assault weapons ban and magazine restriction, but for the most part, for 25 plus years, they've been illegal. So, they're really misleading their very left-wing progressive constituents by making them think that if they pass these bans, we just all go home at the end of the day and everyone's safer for that. And then they abandon the conversation about public safety with respect to schools. So, it's not only really putting the screws to gun owners because they don't really have any, politically, we're not going to vote for progressive leftists. They don't, they we're just sort of a cog in the wheel, but they won't even address the school safety aspect because of the fact that, the very progressive urban legislators are pushing to remove resource officers, not put more in there. And so they're going to, at the end of the day, go home and say these bans will solve everything when we know they'll solve nothing because these folks still get these guns in very restricted states, and not address the issue of school safety. I mean, they're really those two are really, they're not related really in any way. I mean, I think that they try and make them, they run in tandem. I mean, but it's, the school safety part is what most folks expect them to address, and that's not done by the bills that they've been pushing for 10 plus years now.
Wouldn't you think? I mean, just speaking off the cuff here, I mean, wouldn't you think that, especially after an event like what we saw in Texas, I mean, you'd want to shore up a target like an elementary school or any kind of school where you have our children, and shore it up to make sure that it would not be as penetrable by someone who's basically on a suicide mission to go in there and commit an act, that's atrocious acts. I don't understand why that's not first and foremost on everybody's minds. I mean, I understand it. You and I both understand what the political ramifications of it. It's just not going to satisfy those who want to get rid of every gun off the state off the face of the planet. But I mean, from a common sense point of view, if we were talking about this, quote unquote, common sense gun safety legislation, shouldn't it also include the talk about how we're going to make our schools safer?
And you're absolutely right. I'm a teacher, so I've been a teacher for 25 years, and there's less building security than there is. I mean, it's high school level, it's different, so it's very porous. Especially when weather breaks. There's kids coming and going in any district, not just the one where I work. But so it's a tough thing to make sure that there's no in and out. I mean, this idea of having one door where people come and go is not rational. But there are things they can do, to make schools safer. I mean, we have resource officers now at the secondary level. But in the elementary level, I know that not every school has a resource officer. Private schools typically don't. And so, there's places that we go to shop that have more security than they do in schools. And the biggest determinant, again, I don't believe you're going to lock down a school. I don't believe metal detectors will ever work. But this idea of having someone that's there that could intervene, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an SRO, by the way. I mean, you work with a lot of towns and see some of the things that they put in place, and the cost of SROs is extremely high. We have police details on the side of the road to guard workers that are digging a manhole cover or whatever. And so maybe we shift those folks to just be outside of schools as a presence, and have flaggers handle those things, and those details be things like sitting out in front of schools to make sure they're safe, because that's the biggest thing you can do to deter that. It's not the end all be all. It's not going to stop all situations. Right. I mean, Parkland was a huge campus. I get that. But in most situations, your best bang for your buck would be to put those officers there. But again, like I said before, the big progressive push in the urban areas is to get rid of resource officers and replace them with counselors. It's ridiculous. But the progressive leftists in the more rural areas, they're going to owe those urban legislators when it comes time for those bills to be heard and passed. So like it's not far off in the future of them removing those resource officers from schools. So now you won't have firearms, and you'll have the false sense of safety by having an assault weapons ban, I guess, and also not have resource officers in schools.
I mean, you're taking away both lines of potential defenses. Having somebody who's going to be a deterrent like a resource officer, and you're taking away the ability of, which we used to have up until last year, licensed firearm carriers, people who had concealed carry permits were permitted up until last year to carry on school grounds. And I mean, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Perhaps I'm missing something, but I don't know of any licensed concealed carry holders who have been engaging in the type of action that we saw in Texas. So I don't know what the big urgency that was, but now we've taken two options off the table to protect our schools. But getting back to some of these bills that are potentially on the table, I mean, from a lawyer's perspective, and again, I know you're very well versed in this, even though you're not a lawyer, but a lot of these bills have been taken up in other states, have been passed as laws in other states, like high capacity magazine bans, assault weapons bans. There was a few other ones. The age of that one is able to purchase a firearm, and some federal courts of appeals have held that those restrictions did not pass muster under the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. They actually were an undue burden on the fundamental right to possess and own a firearm, at least in your own home, for the purposes of self-defense. And that's essentially what these bills would be doing. If my opinion, as someone who wants to save the state some money, who wants to make sure that we're not paying for things we don't have to pay for and get involved in litigation unnecessarily, I would think that the General Assembly would want to wait, particularly for the end of the month, perhaps to the end of June, for the U.S. Supreme Court to issue their decision on this upcoming case in the Bruin case out of New York, where they're going to decide pretty much how far that right to bear arms outside your home is going to extend. I mean, the issue there really, I mean, the narrow issue there is can a state put, basically have discretion to determine whether or not you have a need to carry a firearm outside your home and issue a permit accordingly. So that's the narrow issue, but that really is going to take up the issue of how far the right to bear arms outside the home extends and what kind of restrictions the state can put on people seeking a license to carry outside their home can be. And right now, obviously in Rhode Island, we have a statute that almost mirrors the New York statute as far as whether you have to show a need, whether you have, showing a need to get a permit. That's the permit issued by the Rhode Island Attorney General. It's discretionary in nature. You have to show a proper need to get that permit. And even then, the Attorney General can deny that permit. So if the U.S. Supreme Court rules that that's not constitutional under our Second Amendment, we're going to have an upheaval in our laws here in Rhode Island that I would think the General Assembly would want to know about before they start passing all these new laws. What is your take on that, Glenn?
Well, you think so, except that we're post the, in 2016, what was it, the Catano case with the stun guns. And now we're, 6 years, 7 years later, whatever, 5 years later, 6 years later, where, our General Assembly has had 2 sessions where this was brought up. The case was just decided. The Attorney General and the state police lost that case, and they still haven't made a move on what to do about stun guns. So I'm not certain they really care about, I'm not certain that anyone really lets them that this case coming out of New York is going to blow up a lot of what happens with gun permitting. And you and I have had this conversation about this, the issue of how they apply this 2-tiered analysis of Second Amendment cases. And so, I mean, certainly you can explain that better than I can, but our folks in Massachusetts that have much more strict, laws in terms of gun permitting, the types of firearms you can own, the magazine capacity, we're in that circuit. So we'll benefit from whatever they decide to litigate. And I guess we'll sort of ride their coattails on whatever the court decides. But yeah, it is sort of, I mean, given the fact that we're in less than 30 days, this case is coming down and, it's going to have a huge impact, like you said. And again, you can explain it better than I can, that this will also extend to how the court analyzes cases involving magazine capacity and involving whether or not something can be quantified as an assault weapon and then outlawed. So, that's certainly is a bonus for us. But the fact that we have to, some legislators have flat out conceded that, like, they really don't care what the court or what we think the court might say about something. That's the onus is on us. We can litigate that, as if we have, everyone has the means to litigate whether or not they can have a magazine that holds 12 rounds or whether their semi-automatic shotgun is now an assault weapon or not an assault weapon. So they're very cavalier about people's civil entitlements. And the part about the magazine that should really, I know a lot of non-gun folks don't really think much about, if they're not interested in firearms and they don't own a firearm, these things are meaningless to them. But it essentially is, them coming in and saying that what you've previously owned is now a felony to possess. And I think it's imagine how cavalier they are about something in Rhode Island where we have a constitutional right, our state constitution, to own and some cases carry firearms, but at least own firearms is very clear. And they're so cavalier with the fact that you've got something that's in our state constitution, and yet they're just going to say you don't have the right to that anymore. So how do you think they're going to treat all of those other things? I mean, there are people that are upset about gas leaf blowers, right? If they're going to do this with our Second Amendment and our right to bear arms, our state constitution, how are they going to treat everyone else's civil entitlements?
Well, that's the most offensive part to me, Glenn, is that the attitude is that, it doesn't matter how the court rules. We don't really care what our Second Amendment here, our Second Amendment equivalent here in Rhode Island says, or what the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says. We're just going to put these things and blow these things right through the legislature anyway. And that, to me, is a violation of everybody's oath. I mean, you have an oath to uphold both constitutions as a Rhode Island General Assembly member, as the Rhode Island Attorney General, the chief law enforcement officer for the state, the governor, and all these people took an oath to uphold not just the laws that they pass, But
Right,
the oath, constitutional rights that have
right.
been already won. One has already been determined by the United States Supreme Court, the right to keep a firearm in your own home for self-defense. They've deemed that a fundamental constitutional right. So now they're going after, they're still going after that here in Rhode Island, even though it's settled law. That is offensive. I mean,
Right.
that's 100% offensive to me as a lawyer, and anybody who's a lawyer who's doing that in the General Assembly, or whether it's the Attorney General or not. Those people should lose their law license because they have violated their oaths.
Yeah, and for for everybody else in the General Assembly, this idea that, in any other issue, if strip guns out of the, any other issue other than guns, folks, the constituents in the state, whether they vote or not, if there's something that needs to be addressed by the General Assembly, whatever negative behavior that is, if it involves automobiles, it involves drugs or alcohol, guns are the only issue where we sort of have this, I call it like trickle down economics. It's sort of like a gun control version where we regulate everyone, and we sort of hope that in 20 years, this turns into a reduction in crime. But it has a huge collateral effect on everybody that's law abiding. Without, like most Rhode Islanders would assume that legislation will be targeted towards the people that are actually behaving inappropriately, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But with guns, it's the complete inverse of that. There isn't a person in the state of Rhode Island that would accept that same conceptual approach if it was something else, like other than firearms. But firearms people, they just tend to have this attitude that, well, it's guns, though. It's guns. They're no more deadly than cars. They're certainly not more deadly than what we've seen with the opioid epidemic, but we have a different approach. So, even the folks in the General Assembly aren't attorneys. They're just very cavalier about saying we're going to take this entire constituency group, these law-abiding citizens, and potentially put them at risk of unintentionally breaking the law, because I think most guys and gals will not know the law has changed. And I know there's one representative that keeps telling me that, it's as if the folks sit there at their computer and keep refreshing the screen to see what laws the General Assembly passed. And so an 11-round magazine, 12-round magazine could land you in prison longer than if you pointed it at someone, because we know they don't prosecute those.
Right. And it's true. And there's ignorance of the law is no defense when it comes to a criminal case. So if you're not paying attention to these closely, and you're not paying attention to whatever directives might come out of these, whatever, depending on what bills pass, and you find yourself a felon overnight. And we have a current Attorney General right now who has no qualms about prosecuting people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens who might have missed a box on the state background form, or said something he didn't think was true, or now is going to unknowingly possess a prohibited item, like a high capacity magazine, as they're calling them. I mean, this is, to me, obviously I'm running for Attorney General, so that, I'm taking a shot at him here.
Sure.
He has the goal. Not the goal. He has the obligation to make sure that the laws that are passed by the General Assembly comport with the Constitution. He's not doing that. Not only is he not doing that, he's standing there with partisan advocates and advocacy groups who are, very far left, but they could be anything for all I care. They don't have to be far left. They could be anything, just anti-gun. And he's standing there advocating for laws which he knows, because he's a smart guy, he knows are in conflict with current court decisions holding that those restrictions have been unconstitutional in other situations. What is he doing? That is 100%. He is a lawyer. He's a former U.S. attorney. He's the Attorney General. He knows better.
Right.
When's he going to answer for that?
Right. And so you're talking about an individual that testified when they reduced the possession of 10 grams of pretty much all drugs, I guess, most drugs, recreational drugs, they reduced the penalty from a felony to a misdemeanor. And his entire testimony was predicated on this idea that a felony possession of a felony conviction serves as an obstacle to housing, an obstacle to getting employment.
It does.
And yet, fentanyl was included in that.
Yeah.
10 grams of fentanyl is enough to kill every student aged, every student in the district in which I live.
It's a chemical
Yeah.
weapon. It's a small chemical
Right.
weapon.
But it's a misdemeanor now, when in fact, a magazine with a capacity of 12 rounds would land you in prison potentially for 5 years. So think about the context there. Why doesn't he view magazines and the restrictions that they're putting forward as an obstacle to employment and to housing? You're right. He's beholden to all of these progressive left organizations. And that's it. That's it. He can't possibly believe in the things that he's up there saying. He's talking about
Not from a legal perspective.
right,
Certainly
right,
not from a
right.
legal
It just
perspective.
it's awful. And yeah, I mean that certainly is your wheelhouse as far as what he's doing and the things that he's pursuing and not pursuing. But just from the things that he said over the last couple of years, it's just he's a politician. That's all he is. He's not interested in actual public safety.
And if he were, he'd be actually putting forth solutions that would actually help our public safety, unlike standing there with the partisan politicians making grandstanding statements with advocacy groups for partisan laws. So that to me is an unforgivable sin when you're the chief law enforcement agent for the state of Rhode Island to go up there and make those kind of claims. But Glenn, as far as what you've heard, and obviously I don't expect you to violate any confidences or anything like that, but as far as what you've heard, the most likely things that maybe we might be seeing coming out of the General Assembly, what do you think we're most likely to see coming out of there, if anything comes through?
Well, it's quite frankly, I think I've heard multiple times from several people that it could potentially be everything. So they have 5 bills that they're pushing for this year: the assault weapons ban, the magazine restriction, no carrying of long guns in public, increasing the age to 21 for long guns, and mandatory safe storage. And there are some progressives that have dug in hard. The rumor was that they were going to try and stop the budget, the progressives, unless those bills all hit the floor. All of the union officials came out, which was ridiculous yesterday.
What does that have to do with unions?
Right, exactly. I mean, the same people that will talk about due process is the bedrock of being in a union and fair employment, all this, were also perfectly okay with all the things that are in these bills, which I'm sure they haven't read, and my union will certainly hear from me. But this is so we're hearing that potentially all of them could be pushed out to the floor. If I had to, I can't even guess. I think people should be like, this is, like the war games, DEFCON 1. This is where it ends for us, I guess, because there's no more. I mean, there's sort of, I say there's no more gun control to pass, and some people push back on me on that. But there's nothing. These are the big boys, and once these pass, that's it. All the small things are really, I think folks will sort of lose interest once the big ones are gone, and then once they pass. So, I can't really say. I'm concerned.
It's a 5-alarm fire at this point.
I don't want to say that one thing over the other is going to pass. Like anything could happen at this point. I mean, there are blocks of legislators that are working hard, and then there are some that are scared. They don't want this. I mean, they say they have the votes to pass this in the floor of the House and the Senate, but even folks that would vote for it don't want to vote for this because they know, some of them know what it's going to do to their constituents, and some are afraid of their constituents because they think they'll lose in the fall. So, I have a gut instinct, and that's just
imagine that legislators, representatives, and senators are afraid of their constituents. They're afraid of accountability. Can you imagine that? I mean, isn't that the way it should be? I mean,
right.
maybe I wasn't paying attention in civics class,
right.
but my understanding was they're supposed to be our voice.
Right.
And if they can't face their constituents with their votes, what are they doing there?
Right. Well, it's the unions. Really, yesterday seemed to be a shift for some legislators, not all. So, like I said, I've heard things from different legislators that this will pass and that will pass, but the unions are pushing hard for the entire package, and they have the means to send out mailers. Whether they'll follow through with that and whether people will listen to them, I don't think folks that aren't in unions really are swayed by what the unions think. And I think a lot of union members are, today we're pushing back because of the fact that these people are advocating for things that have nothing to do with what their unions should be advocating for. So like you said, I think that they should be afraid of their constituents. It's just a matter of who they're more afraid of. They should be afraid of their constituents, not the unions. But
absolutely, it's an unbelievable odd bedfellows. I would certainly say,
right.
because I really don't understand what the unions have to do with passing these bills. I mean, particularly ones a lot of their members, which I know for a fact, simply because of the work I do, a lot of their members don't support. And to me, that's just not doing your job as a union. But
Right.
um, I feel like this is going to be a battle, like you're talking about. This is a 5 alarm fire that we are facing here in Rhode Island, and I feel like you and I've talked about this. There's been a lot of malaise on our side. I say our side being people who believe in the right to keep and bear arms over the years, thinking that there'll be people out there fighting for us. There'll be people donating money and fighting, filing lawsuits for us, but we can't have people who believe in this right sit back and hope other people are going to do something for us at this point. Now the time has come. What you're saying is even partly true, that they have the votes and they are ready to go as soon as they team up, and the unions are getting behind it. And we obviously have seen the governor, the attorney general, the legislators, the advocates, they've all been on the front steps of the state house pushing these things. Now is the time that people need to make sure that these people who are going to infringe upon our rights will hear from us come November if they do this.
Right. And it really comes down to a block of, so when I say they have the votes, there are some folks in that chamber who will fold like a lawn chair if they know enough of their constituents are upset by this. And so, people need to keep the pressure up, and you knock a few of them off here and there, and then, maybe they meaning vote wise.
Yeah, no, we have to clarify that, talking about guns.
I'll take that. Right. But it's a lot of the folks that sort of sit in the middle will fold on these bills, and there are some of them that I know will probably vote for it, but they don't want to vote for it. So it's not impossible. It's just that folks need to get off the couch. They need to go to the state house for the rally tomorrow. They need to stay on top of what their legislators do, what they vote for, and then get involved come election time. I mean, you're running for office, and so now I'll certainly now it's me promoting you, but like there are not a lot of people stepping up to help out, and so you rely on a handful of folks that work their tails to the bone. It shouldn't be that way. Folks should cherish their civil entitlements, and come election time, remember that the folks that step forward to run are dedicating an immense amount of time. I'm helping a couple of candidates here my way, and the amount of time that they're dedicating and that you've dedicated it can't be done alone. And folks need to donate money to folks like you, and they need to volunteer for your campaigns, and they need to stay on top of what their legislators are supporting and not supporting.
Yeah, I couldn't echo that more, Glenn. And I'm just going to say this, and we'll end our conversation, starting this way. I'm issuing a direct challenge to Attorney General Peter Neronha to make sure he does his job correctly and go out there and make sure you fight against any laws that infringe upon our rights to keep and bear arms. That's the Constitution. That's the highest value. That's the highest law on our land. It's above anything that this General Assembly passes. You have an independent constitutional ability to step in there and say, hey, wait a minute, this is against our rights. These are against the fundamental rights of the people. And I will not, as the chief law enforcement officer, infringe upon those rights. I challenge you to do that. I challenge you to step away from your partisan background and say, listen, I got to put that aside and do what's right, legally correct. I hope you'll do it for the sake of the people of Rhode Island. I'm not hopeful that you'll do it, but I'm not hopeful that you actually follow through with it, but I hope you'll do it and step up to the challenge here. But Glenn, if people want to get involved in this and help out and do what they can to fight back, what can they do, and where can they reach someone like you to do this?
Well, they can check us out on social media. So our main page is the Rhode Island Firearms Owners League, and if you we update things regularly. We have about the rallies that are taking place, and when it come election time, certainly we post a lot of things. That's mainly where people would go, to get information. They can also go to our website. It's rifol.org. We currently have a tool up there, so you can look up who your legislators are, so you can make sure you call them and the Speaker and the Senate President.
Glenn, I really appreciate the conversation tonight. It's important that people keep up to date on what's going on, not just with firearms, but just with the legislation in general. People need to be informed, and they need to know who's making these decisions and how their state representatives and state senators are voting. and how our elected officials on the state level are also behaving. So I really appreciate you having the conversation with me tonight.
You should have me on.
Yeah. And, again, like everybody knows, I'm Chaz Calenda. I'm an attorney. I'm running for Attorney General this year in November. I'll be on the ballot against Attorney General Peter Nerona. If you want to keep the law above politics, check me out, vote for me. You can go to my website at CHAS4AG.com. If you need legal assistance, I still am a practicing attorney as far as I know, at the law firm of Inman and Torgy, 823-9200. I'm at 1500 Newsneck Hill Road in Coventry. So this concludes another episode of Chaz Calenda, Attorney at Law, here tonight with my guest, Glenn Valentine. Glenn, I hope you come back and see us on another time, and definitely keep us up to date on what's going on in the Second Amendment community. Thanks again.
Thanks.
And thanks again, everybody. Have a good evening.